Thanks everyone for coming out to the talk Food and Beer, which I hope when you heard that title for a talk, you were just as excited as I was when this was first proposed to the talks team. And so without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chef Daniel Burns, brewer Jeppe Jarnit-Bjergso, and their co-author Joshua David Stein.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's an easy sell, food and beer. And we're really happy to be here. I think I speak for all of us. So the idea of the book, obviously, and these guys can talk about it more, is both of these guys have deep knowledge. Daniel in the world of fine dining, having worked at some of the best restaurants in the world, including the Fat Duck, Noma, where he was pastry chef. He headed research and development for Momofuku here in the city. St. John's, so kind of like the greatest hits. And Jeppe is
just making beer.
Just a dude making beer, but some of the best beer and most highly rated beer in the world. So, just so you guys know, they have this restaurant out in Greenpoint called Tørst, and then in the back there's a part of it called Luksus, and that's kind of how we set up the book, in the sense that the first part of the book takes you through the Tørst experience, and it's really centered around flavors of beer and how you the kind of diversity of flavor in beer and its assonance and resonance within cuisine. And then the Luksus section in the back really walks you through the tasting menu and what that would feel like being a Luksus, which only has 16 seats, right?
16, yeah.
So the chances of, eating there are slim, although everyone should try. It's a wonderful experience. But I kind of wanted to start it off. These guys speak really passionately about where we are in the culinary world in terms of beer. Maybe Jeppe, you could start about before you opened Tørst and Luksus. What was the status of beer within fine dining?
I got into craft beer or better beer, whatever you call it, about 20 years ago. I'm actually older than I look. Some of you are like, did you start drinking when you were 10 years old? And back then, I don't think it even existed in fine dining. I didn't do that much fine dining back then, obviously, since I didn't have a lot of money. But the couple times I did it, they might have some beers on the menu, but they were all pretty bad or not very thought of. I moved to New York about 4 years ago and started to explore the dining scene here and went to some of these restaurants. And also back in Denmark before I moved here, Noma was a perfect example. Went to these restaurants that were considered some of the best in the world or some of the best in the city and the country. And food was awesome, wine list was awesome. I looked at the beer list. That's how I got to work with Noma. I was eating there one day, and Noma is considered one of the best restaurants in the world. And I was looking at the beer list, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" It was just a bunch of random beers they put on, and it wasn't well thought of. I remember the sommelier from Noma came down, and he's one of the most recognized sommeliers in the world, pretty much. And he came down, and he knew I was a beer guy, and I was a brewer, and all that. And he proudly showed me the beer list, and he was like, "So what do you think?" And I glanced at it and I looked at him and said, "It looks pretty bad, actually." And he was like, "What the hell do you mean by that?" But he, instead of getting offended, we started a conversation, and I had a meeting with him after, and I told him, "You know what, I can help you out if you want it. I know you're very good at wine, doesn't mean you're necessarily very good at beer." And he took my advices, and we redid the whole thing. Actually took it down from about 50 different beers to 5 that were all brewed specifically for Noma, that had a story, had flavor that actually matched what they did. So that was the long answer to a short question. Fine dining and beer wasn't a big thing some years ago.
And for you, Daniel, like when you were working I don't know, do you feel like working in the kitchen, beer, I don't know, is it true that that's what guys drink in the kitchen but not in the dining room, it wasn't served?
Yeah, after shift drink, and that's
Yeah.
it, yeah. Well, I see a similar thing in sort of like the last 5-6 years. when you go have these bigger menus at EMP or places like that throughout the world, that when it's say like 10 beverage paired, 10 years ago, for sure, 10 is wine. Now might be 1 or 2 cocktails, 1 or 2 beers, so it's the sommeliers I always think about, they have zero budget, access to every wine anywhere in the world, and they still, when they see the 10 dishes to pair, they're thinking about beers now, which is, that says everything basically. Yeah.
But when you were starting at like the Fat Duck, for instance, beer wasn't part of the Michelin kind of scene.
It wasn't, no, and it's that, as we say with the book, that's a big thing that we're trying to bring into the conversation of fine dining and beer. And Jeppe said it before, wouldn't it be great, fast forward even a few years or 5 years from now, that all the best restaurants would have beer as a pairing option?
Yeah, I guess I should stop here and just mention that Luksus is the only Michelin-starred restaurant to only have a beer pairing. So they are kind of like leading the way. It is true that other Michelin-starred restaurants do have beer, but you can't have wine. I don't know about you, Daniel. Jeppe loves wine a lot, but you can't have wine at Luksus or Tørst. It's just not on the menu.
When we opened the place 3 years ago, we actually made a decision and only got a beer license, which you can do. You can do beer and beer and wine, and beer and wine and spirits or whatever. But we only chose to have a beer license. And again, it's not that we don't like wine, but we just wanted to, don't lose focus. We didn't want to open up and start with beer, and then people are going to come in and say, hey, can we please do some wine? And it's easy to kind of fall for all that. And we were like, nope, we're only going to do beer license. It's actually legal to drink wine at our place, which is kind of cool.
Makes it hard to drink.
I think there's an interesting dynamic in the sense that fine dining is traditionally a very elite, honestly, an elitist thing to do, to have that disposable income, to live in that world. And beer, on the other hand, is a very democratic drink in the sense that everyone here, if you wanted, could go home and make beer. I don't know if it would be very good, but it could be very good. But you'd be hard pressed to go home and make a bottle of wine from the grape to the bottle. And I think that's one of the dynamics that's so interesting at Tørst and Luksus, that just because something's democratic and accessible doesn't mean it's not high quality.
No, but it's also one of the, I think it's one of, I've actually answered that question a lot lately. Why hasn't beer done a bigger impact in fine dining? And I actually think it has something to do with exactly what you're saying. Beer is, by history or by tradition or whatever, considered to be, poor man's drink. It's extremely cheap, or it used to be very cheap. I don't know how much a Budweiser is, 50 cents or $1.
You mean like America?
No, it's cheap all over the world.
No, they changed their name to America.
Oh, that's and America, sorry about that.
In America, it's cheap.
No, but it is considered a cheap product, and until 5-10 years ago, most people in the world considered it a very cheap product. It was something you had, to get drunk pretty much, or quench your thirst. That is definitely changing, but it's a problem in the fine dining restaurant world because it's very hard to mark up. You can buy, the sommeliers can buy a wine and they can mark it up 5 times, which they actually do, and everybody's glad to pay the price for that wine because they know the wine is supposed to be, costly. But if you take a beer in and you mark it up 5 times, you're really like, why the hell do I have to pay $15 for an America all of a sudden when I only pay $2 in a store? And that's definitely one of the reasons why it has, been going slower in the fine dining world.
Yeah. I think another aspect, although, we talk a little bit about it in the book, is that, after Prohibition in America, the type of beer that we had, the large industrial producers of beer weren't making beers that have so much flavor. And that's one of the things that we try to do in the book, is show the diversity of flavor you can have. You can have tart, fruity. As a chef, Daniel, being able to bounce off all those flavors.
Yeah, that's actually the coolest part. We talked a lot about wine has all these tradition and terroir-based flavors associated with where the grapes grow. You can only make certain flavors out of the wine there. Beer is the exact opposite. You can take products for the beer from all over the world, and then add in any flavors you want also. So the words we've said a lot is the spectrum of flavor that accessible in terms of the beer world after the dish is made it can be much bigger than that with wine or spirits. So that's the exciting part. There's so many ways you can go with the pairing. Once it's done, you can go very comparative flavors with the dish or contrasting, or I think the cooler one we talked about too is that the lesser elements in the dish, say coriander, you can have a beer that pairs very well with coriander even though it's not a main component in the dish, for example. So then the guest's experience is the beer works, but you're not actually quite sure why it's working with the food.
Yeah, that's what the experience of being, especially when you go to Luksus, there's a beer companion, a beer host, someone who tells you about all these bottles of beer that you're drinking, and there's amazing stories behind every one. And I feel like those stories, although it also exists in wine, but these stories are always so interesting to me, that you have this bottle with this history behind it's usually some weirdo somewhere doing something strange and adding whatever they want. This weirdo. I mean, that Daniel alluded to it, that there's kind of two different ways you can get at flavors in beer which aren't available in wine. You can either have you have some flavors coming from the yeast or the hops or the malt, or you can just say fuck it and add what you want inside. Like talk maybe a little bit about biscotti break as an example of that.
Yeah, I mean it's a general thing about beer making. We like to say there's no laws in beer making. There's a lot of laws in wine making. You can't do this, you can't do that. If you added olive to a wine, people would have a hard time taking that seriously. I've added olive to a beer and people love it. It makes it a little easier. Biscotti break is a perfect example. It's a stout that I made a couple of years ago with we tried to imitate a biscotti. So we added coffee, almond, and vanilla, and it's something you can get so many flavors out of that. And now we even did a donut break where we added a bunch of donuts. I wanted to taste if it actually could make it taste like a liquid donut, and it actually did. So now we do this beer called Donut Break, and every time we make it, we buy 1,000 donuts from a small local donut maker in South Carolina and add it. And it's fun. I mean, it's important to state that we do all this to make a delicious beer. It's not just to do something crazy. I don't add olive just to say, hey, I added olive. It tastes like crap, but it was fun to do, and people are going to talk about it. We do it to bring something out, a flavor out that I either haven't had before, or a flavor I'm trying to find from doing all this. But it is cool that we can do that. Daniel, I was eating at Luksus a couple of years ago, and we had a dessert with licorice and beet that I loved, and I talked to Daniel about it after. I was like, we talked about, wouldn't it be cool if I made a beer with licorice and beet for the appetizer? So you start with the beer with this flavor profile that where you have a dessert with kind of the same flavor profiles, and he was like, yeah, let's do it. And it's cool that we can do that. I don't see how you would be able to do that with wine. I mean, you don't want to add beet and licorice to wine. So.
I mean, that's the thing about making beer as well. It's so reactive that there's actually a beer coming out around the book. Is it already out?
Not yet.
So there's a beer that will be coming out, in celebration of the release of the book called Food and Beer, and the beer is called the Book Beer. So it's all very solipsistic, I guess. And we went down to Charleston where Jeppe works with this guy Ed Westbrook, and we made the beer in how long did it take? From
6 hours.
Yeah, 6 hours. So it's something you can do quickly, which gives you the ability to kind of be reactive and interactive with Daniel's cuisine.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a little longer. You have to ferment it also. That takes a couple of weeks at least. But yeah, the actual beer making only takes a couple of hours.
How does it, I don't know if I ever really asked you guys, how does it actually work going through the menu of Luksus pairing, and how do you guys work together?
The dish gets decided or close to decided, and then we need to taste the dish, and that's the time when we can try out 4 or 5 different beers and see which one works best. And as I say, we can go very widely varied in styles and see how they interact with which one there's always like a clear winner as to which one will work best. But then you also have to think about the progression of the beers throughout the menu. So you can't have
so how
sour,
many,
sour.
How many courses is a...
It's about 12 servings. So there's right now between 6 or 8 snacks. And then you have one beer with that. And then the main dishes, 4 main dishes and a palate cleanser. So 1 beer with each of the main dishes. So 5 beers paired.
I wanted to ask, how does pairing with beer, how has that changed? I mean, you had such a crazy evolution as a chef. So Daniel obviously worked at restaurant. He started out as a mathematician, then worked making soup, then worked in like high-end kitchens on the savory side, then went to Noma, moved over to pastry, right? I'm probably skipping 1 or 2. Went to Fat Duck. Went to Fat Duck, moved to pastry, went to Noma, became the pastry chef, and then went to Momofuku, and where you're not cooking for people. At Momofuku, he stayed in a room and came up with ideas that like drove the enterprise forward, but you weren't plating food.
Yeah.
You were it was pure research.
Yeah, that was research and development was my title, and in charge of making new dishes and all of these longer term fermentation projects. Like they have the Hozon and stuff available now, which is really crazy to see that it's finally available for purchase when we started working on it 5-6 years ago.
So how has now cooking or now creating menus and using flavors, knowing that you're going to be pairing it with beer, changed, or has it changed the way you think about flavor, for instance?
It hasn't actually. The most I get inspired most by, first of all, the seasons, and then also by traveling. You know, go to new places and taste new. I know you do as well, Jeppe. When you travel somewhere new, you're like, holy shit, I've never tried this type of citrus fruit, and even just eating very much eating the local cuisine wherever you go is like, it can be the truest form of food. And then
what's a good recent example?
I was in Nashville. I was in Nashville recently, and then to see the home style cooking, the hot chicken and whatever else goes along with that can be just super honest cooking, but most of all the seasons, and then it's a matter of managing it. Now we're in the 3rd year. We can start to sort of predict ahead. Okay, radishes are coming soon, so you have to stay on top of what's coming next in order to change the menu as often as we do, because we try to change it every 4 or 5 weeks. That all the dishes change, so it takes a lot of planning.
So that question's a little bit about how you've been evolving and innovation, and I wonder for both of you if you're going to answer how do you approach innovation within Evil Twin and Tørst and Luksus in the kitchen, and how far do you push it?
I mean, it's.
And have you failed doing it ever?
It's some very separate things we're talking about, because Evil Twin is the brewery, and when I make beer, I don't think about the restaurant, because it's, and we talk about that. We talk about it in the book, and we've talked about that a lot. It's important for us to say that it's not like we work together creating a beer that matches the food, or the food matches the beer, or that. I make my beer, Daniel makes his food. Sometimes we use Evil Twin, sometimes we use something else. I mean, it's like a sommelier, he tastes the food, he finds a wine that pairs, and he puts them together. So, if I to talk about Evil Twin and evolution, that's something I think a lot about, and I travel more than normal people. I think I've brewed in more than 20 different countries the last 4 years. I'm probably the brewer that has brewed in most different countries ever. And it's something I do to learn, not just about flavors and ingredients, but also to learn and stay on top of the beer, evolution all over the world. When I started, professionally going into craft beer about 12 years ago, I wanted to make a business out of it, and I wanted to create beer, and I had a beer store, and I have a distribution company, and we have a bar and a restaurant, all that. But it was also, for me, it was also a mission to spread the love of beer. I know it sounds a little, But I actually mean it, when I go to Mexico and become a part of that scene and go to a festival as like the head name for the festival, it's to show them or to teach them how you can do it and tell them about how we do it in the USA and how we do it in Europe, and that's the fun part.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you talk a lot about is that you can make tremendous beer anywhere. It's not like a brewery that's not making great beer can't make great beer. It's in the recipe.
It is. It totally is, and that's also one of the big differences between wine and beer making, and why beer making in many ways is more approachable. I mean, I get asked lots of, well, how do you see yourself as a scientist or an artist or a chemist? And I always, answer, I see myself as a cook, because what I do is the same that Daniel does. We take some different ingredients, we put them together in a certain kind of way, and we try to create something that at the end of the day tastes good. And that's all that matters. Nothing else matters when you make food. Nothing else matters when you make beer. It has to taste good. Otherwise, there's no reason to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the question?
That was it.
That was the question.
Well, the question is actually like how far you push innovation. How important is it to innovate for you?
I mean, I push it a lot. I'm known for pushing it more than most people, and it's not that I push it just to push it. I do it because I want to, I get this idea. It's more like I have this idea of something, and I wonder how it tastes. And if nobody else has done it before, I have to do it myself, and that's definitely something that drives me a long way in my beer making, because I love food and I spend all my time and all my money on eating, if it's from street kitchen to the best restaurants in the world. I just love flavor. I like to say I love to put things in my mouth. That can sound a little bit weird, but I really like flavors, and that's not just beer. It's food and beer and cocktails and coffee and wine and everything. And it interests me so much that I want to taste everything there is in this world, and something that obviously I have to do myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the innovation is having worked at these, Fat Duck and Noma. You see 20 to 30 people come and stage for free every month. And that's people oftentimes going in to write down all the recipes they can and then go back to wherever they work and just copy it,
Yeah.
So that's totally crazy in my mind that anyone would want to do that or choose to do that. So for me, the big thing is I've seen a lot of things from these best chefs in the world, and I'm conscious of it, and I will never copy anything I've learned. So the innovation is okay, I've seen that and that with a carrot, for example. What am I going to do now?
Yeah.
So
it's almost like you made a big challenge for yourself, because you've seen some of the best, most innovative and best ideas in the world, and you have to now avoid those and,
I
develop
have to.
above.
I mean, obviously,
further.
and that's the thing I always say to young cooks too. You can't just I'm going to work with my buddy who's a chef for 2 years. Well, you got to be careful about that, because it informs exactly how you think about food, whether you're conscious of it or not. Because you go home and cook, and then you're like, oh, I think I'm going to make, flank steak with potatoes. Oh, that's what's on the menu on my section right now. So it's hard to get out of it once you choose a restaurant. So, innovation is, I'm very conscious of where I've been, what I've learned, and then how I can adapt it to make it feel like our own in the kitchen we're trying to do. But it's importantly, the one big thing everyone, I think, comes to Luksus thinking a little bit, is it New Nordic, the Renee's scope of influence has been very wide, and but I don't think
the owner of Noma.
Yeah, Renee Redzepi from Noma. But I don't think New Nordic's possible here in North America. But the use of less proteins and more vegetables is something I've taken very much to heart, and so it's actually possible to have quite a long format tasting menu, but still feel nice and a little bit refreshed.
Have a spring in your step.
Yeah. So that's the other thing too. You find so often when these restaurants, they have tasting menu and a la carte, and then you just get super full when you take the tasting menu sometimes. So I'm conscious about how much food you eat by the end also.
Well, we wanted to open it up for questions. These guys are obviously have a lot of expertise and knowledge and are, kind of friendly, so they might answer things if you ask them it.
So this is a question for Jeppe. Seems like you experiment a lot and make a lot of really interesting beers. I'm sure you have experiments that have failed and stuff that's just come out awful. So I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about something that you were excited about and you tried and it just didn't work.
Not really. Actually, I haven't had too many fails. I've obviously been asked that question. Have you ever done anything that tasted terrible? I've done a few beers that I definitely wouldn't do again. One of them was that you can definitely call that a failure because I made a beer in Denmark in the very beginning of Evil Twin, where I blended the beer with 10% wine, Chardonnay, because an old brewery in Belgium had done the same thing in the 90s, and I loved it, and I wanted to do it, and the beer came out really good. I blended it, came out really good. We wanted to export it to the USA, but it's illegal to sell a beer and wine blend in the USA. So I made an experiment where I actually used grape juice, real grape juice, and to see if I could ferment it with the beer and see how that came out. Not the same thing. So that was definitely a fail. I mean, I had an idea it wouldn't come out the same, obviously, because it's not wine, but fermented grape juice should be close to something you could call wine, but it did not taste as good.
And then the blueberry, I remember there was something about blueberry skins. Was it?
Yeah, that was actually not a beer I did under the Evil Twin. I made a beer with a brewery in Belgium called Cantillon, which is known for. We still make it actually for spontaneous fermented beers, and we use blueberries, and they had never used blueberries before. And the first year we made it, we just added whole blueberries. But it's something it's blueberry have the hard skin, and if you don't break it down before you add it to the beer, I don't know exactly what happened, but something on the skin turned the beer, almost into vinegar, and it tasted pretty terrible actually. The year after we froze the blueberries before we added them because that breaks the berry down, and now we freeze it and it works. But that was definitely a kind of a failure as well.
That's cool.
Thanks.
They'll also get beer recommendations if you ask.
Is your beer just, is it bottled or what do you think of canned beer? What about the Italian?
What I think of it, of cans?
Yeah,
it's awesome.
like it's picking up.
We're moving all our beers, or pretty much all of them, to cans. We've been doing that the last couple of years. It's way better. It's better for the beer, it's better for storage, it's better for the environment, it's cheaper, it looks cooler. I know 10 years ago, if you saw beer in a can, you wouldn't buy it because you consider it a bad beer pretty much. But that has definitely changed. I actually read that more than 50% of the craft beers are in cans now, which is kind of cool. But it's just a better media to put it in. I'm glad that someone figured that out.
A bunch of us in the room are homebrewers. Could you talk about your homebrewing setup that you've had over the years or still have?
I don't have it anymore. I started homebrewing I think I did my first batch of beer in 2000, maybe 2001. I don't know how you guys probably have cool setups and everything. We use plastic buckets, pot, plastic buckets. Everything was like kitchenware pretty much. You couldn't get fancy systems back then. I see home brewing system now that looks like real brewers, which is kind of cool. When I started home brewing, I was like everybody else. I just, I was drinking beer, and I thought it would be fun to actually see if you could make something that tasted as good as the ones that we bought, and I found out pretty fast that you actually could. My advice to homebrewers are always just experiment, because some of the best beers I've made came from just trying new things out and not really knowing what I was doing, but just see if it worked, and often it actually came out really good. So I had a very primitive setup. What is yours?
All grain, just like 10-gallon pot of mash tun, carboys.
So it's, yeah, okay. It's
Standard.
not one of those fancy things that looks like real brewery.
I don't think I know anyone in New York that has like a nice big.
Maybe not. The space
I'm
is
surprised
a
there's not one here in the Greenpoint.
We've tried.
How far did you guys get?
Not very.
Do you have another question?
Yeah, so for Jeppe, but just curious whether the beers that you serve are best paired with fine dining, with any dining, or on their own. Does it make a difference in terms of how best to appreciate those beers?
Definitely not. I mean, if I understand the question right, if the beers that we use at Luksus, if they are best for that?
Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, they're best for drinking. They just happen to pair well with Daniel's food. I mean, when we opened the restaurant, you know, we hadn't done it before. We hadn't opened the restaurant before. We hadn't done a restaurant with beer pairing. So obviously, we had an idea of what we were going to do, but with the evolution of his restaurant and how Daniel is cooking and everything, you know, the beer pairings have changed also, and we have realized that, you know, what we use the most now is like beers with some kind of wild yeast, if it's spontaneous or Brettanomyces or whatever it is. And that's just because it works well with Daniel's food, because Daniel's food is like very, without sounding wrong, organic flavors, like, you know, earthy and a little bit funky, and, you know, he's used fermentation and pickling and all that. So we just figured out that works the best. Had we done a old school French restaurant, we probably would have done wine. But had we done a French restaurant with beer, we would probably use different beers, you know, more dark and, you know, full-bodied.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I guess I'm just sort of at the idea of pairing both from the food and the drink point of view, whether the beer makes the food better or the food makes the beer better.
Oh, okay. Both,
It's like
I would say.
a true marriage.
Well, I think that when you
A good marriage.
good example is, you know, maybe there's a sour beer, you taste it first, and then the dish is quite sweet. They go somewhere together. With wine is going to happen less, in my experience. The character of the wine is going to stand much more separately to when you taste it with the dish, I think. So I think beer is good in that aspect, and you can choose beers that like really harmonize with the dish. I don't know if
I agree.
you guys think that. Yeah.
I think it's also a matter of all the beers that you have at Luxus they can stand on their own and they're wonderful, but it's not that you can pair every beer with fine dining. Some beers are just, we had talked about like super sour, you know, it's like not every beer, I don't know, I mean, in my experience, is suitable really for pairing this way. Sometimes it's so dominant and so strongly flavored that you'd have a hard time finding harmony.
Yeah, I mean, some beers you just want to, like some wines you just want to drink alone, some beers you just want to drink alone.
Jesus.
Hi. So essentially, I believe there are two schools of thought, which is the like, for example, the Germans, that if you put more than water and barley and like the four essential elements on a beer, you cannot call it beer. And then you have the free for all, like you can add corn and you can add maybe yogurt even to a beer and then like call it
I've done
beer.
that.
And like you may, like as you said before, like you look for specific tastes and flavors, and you're like in search of like specific things. But what are your thoughts on like the people that just like put beer in like whatever they find in the garage and then like mix it and then they call it a beer and then put it out there?
I mean, I think you asked a couple of different questions. Let's take the German purity law first. It's not a law anymore, so you can, you know, even the Germans can put olive in their beer now. I mean, I think it's kind of cool that, I think, you know, I'm not a big fan of laws in general, but I think it's kind of cool that, you know, they had this way of developing their beer scene in Germany, where they had to stick to the rules of only the 4 main ingredients. It's because, you know, the best pilsners in the world, with no comparison, comes out of Germany, for the reason that they have done those for 500 years and have been able to do a lot else. They have, but you know what I mean. They've definitely perfected what they perfect, but what they did. But they also, you know, have limited them a lot in terms of what they could do. in terms of just doing whatever, I mean, I'm not. I can't say I'm not a fan of it because I do a lot of experiments. But you know, as I also explained earlier, I always have the end product in mind. I always have in mind, you know what? I might add olive, or I might ferment it in my garage inside of my car's fuel tank or something like that. But it has to taste good, you know, and that's very important to me because people that read about me and the beers that I make might think, you know, this guy's just up for fun and up for doing crazy things so that, you know, people have something to talk about. That's not what it's about. I always aim to get balance. I always aim to get, you know, good flavors out of it. And yeah, sometimes you could say it's a little over the top. I did a beer in Norway with pizza and money. That was pretty much the only exception where we just did it for fun. But you know, in general, I think, you know, if you have that in mind when you make a beer, I think it should be free for all to do whatever they want. I mean, some people now are experimenting. You know, we experiment with a lot of things: yeast, hops, obviously, malt, adjuncts, you know, different ingredients. But now people have started to experiment exactly with fermenters, you know, concrete fermenters and open clay fermenters and all that. I actually think that's pretty cool because, you know, we might explore some new or find some new flavors from that.
In the back.
Hi, thanks for being here. 2 questions. So one is, can you give us a sneak preview of what might be coming up on your next iteration of your menu? And then the other is, do you have any good recommendations for chili beer, like spicy beer?
I'll leave the spicy beer to Liam. So we've changed the main course recently, which is duck right now. So that will stay for the next few weeks, and then we're doing. There's always a broth course. The snacks change most often, so that can be changed different every day. But the broth we do every menu, and right now it's roasted turnip broth, and it's changing to an onion broth with asparagus and crab next. So that should happen in the next few days. And then the first serving is like us chefs are like longing for the green things, and so it's more of like a salad at the start with veal tongue at the moment with warm vinaigrette. So rhubarb, and then rhubarb just came out. So as soon as it's here, I jump on a rhubarb dessert pretty fastish, I would say. So yeah, the main dishes evolve sort of constantly, where I'll change the broth and the salad will change next week, and then be time to change the duck. The main course is the one to sort of manage the most because we age the ducks 10 to 12 days, and then you have to find the right supplier and figure out the cooking method fully before you put it on the menu. So I would say overall, if we change the menu 10 times a year, the main course might change only 8 because of all that stuff that goes. Because you don't want to just say, give me some ducks. You know, like you want to source everything properly and then set up the also from their side, even a small restaurant. The lamb, for example, we get from Elysian Farm, and that's Thomas Keller uses them. And I try to change my lamb neck order from 10 to 12, and she's like freaking out on the email. You know, like it's quite the certain good products for especially proteins are highly sought after, so you have to be a little bit careful how you manage that.
The other thing, just to mention about the menus, you also have this thing called like the second course. It's a second part of like the course.
So I'll never copy anything I've done, but anywhere. But that was a really cool thing at Noma. There was a la carte and tasting when I started, and so there was just a choice of 3. How a lot of restaurants do it: 3 starters, 3 main course, 3 dessert. And those were classic dishes that had been on the tasting menu and everyone loved it. And so they put it to the a la carte, which is one of the coolest ways I've ever seen anyone run an a la carte. It's basically classic hits of the restaurant for the a la carte menu. But so for the main dish, though, you would get, say, duck breast. And then soon after, when the main dish was cleared out, you get a second serving of the leg or the neck or something else.
It's like a related.
Yeah, so it's a
dish.
way to get show conscious use of the product, and also, back when I first started, they can speak to it, but Scandinavians didn't used to eat out that much at fine dining places, and so oftentimes the guests would be like, no, we didn't order this, you know. And like, no, you don't have to pay extra, it's just like part of it.
It's for free.
It's for free.
I like to
Okay,
say
then.
Danish people's favorite food is free.
Free.
Chili beer.
An example of a good chili beer.
Yeah, I've tried the even more Jesus, I think.
Even more.
Is it?
That's
yeah.
not a chili beer.
The
Spicy nacho.
You're just
Firewater.
What is it?
Even more chili.
Even more chili.
Almost chili.
Almost chili.
Oh yeah, that's a version of emoji. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
made in
yeah,
Spain actually. Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you like it?
it's delicious.
Yeah.
I love
mean,
chili
when,
beers.
when you make it, you know, I've made a couple of chili beers. The most common one is a stout, like un más chili Jesus. It's made in Spain. I don't speak Spanish, but I wanted to give it a Spanish name just to have a connection. Yeah, when you make it a spicy beer where you want some, you know, spiciness in it or some hotness, the most common one is definitely a stout because it just works, you know, like chocolate and chili works really well together. Stout has, you know, a lot of chocolate flavors too, so it works really well. I also made last year I did a beer called Spicy Nachos that we later changed to Firewater, which is actually the total opposite. So that's a pale ale, 5.5%, very light and refreshing. And I used jalapenos instead of like red chilies, and we used them fresh. So it has a lot of jalapeno flavor, but not a shit ton of spiciness, but like more the chili flavor, and it actually worked extremely well. I mean, that was one of my experiments where like, oh shit, this actually works really well.
Very juicy.
Yeah, it was just like, you know, you had a lot of in the aroma, you had a lot of, you know, fresh jalapeno, which smells awesome, but you didn't get that crazy bite. You got a little bite.
So that one's in the book, and then I decided to pair spicy nachos with it.
Yeah, of course.
They're delicious nachos.
We have
They're the
we
best nacho recipe.
We have a new beer coming out in the fall that we just went to Lima, Peru to make a test batch. So it's a porter made with purple potato, some Peruvian corn, and a Peruvian chili. I forgot the name, but it's not a very spicy, but it's extremely aromatic. It almost tastes like tomato, but a spicy tomato. So that one is coming out in the fall. I'm excited about that.
Do you have a?
Yeah, actually. So curious, when you go to other breweries and you're using their facilities, how much are you working with the folks there? What's the interaction like? And then, I guess, how does that compare to working in other folks' restaurants?
Right, yeah.
I mean, I always make the recipes, and sometimes they give me feedback. You know, and I sometimes have to change things because, you know, a common thing would be I make a recipe and have 10% oat. I use a lot of oat both in IPAs and stouts for the mouthfeel and all that. Some breweries are just not set up to use a lot of oats. You know, they might come back and say, you know what, if we use 10% oat, we're going to get a stock mass, and it's going to take us 24 hours to make it, and, you know, we're going to lose a lot, blah, blah. And then, you know, you have to adjust it. That's kind of, I think it's kind of the fun thing to do what I do, brew at all these different breweries, because it always challenges you to rethink what you do. You know, it's not like they come back and say you have to redo the whole recipe. Then I'm probably going to be like, oh, I might make another beer, but, you know, I have to adjust. Plus, sometimes we go to a certain country and have an idea of something I want to do, but I can't get the ingredients. You know, specifically hops. In Asia, I brewed in Taiwan and Japan and a couple of other countries, and you know, it's hard to get some of the hops over there. And I might have this idea of making this IPA with yuzu or sudachi that works really well with this hop, but if I can't get the hop, you know, I can't do it. So
a lot of conversations have to come out.
Definitely.
In terms of working in other people's kitchens, or the most important, we've started to invite guest chefs to cook with us at Luksus, which is, I mean, it's you invite friends and it can be amazing. The thing about collaboration is something good is going to come out. You have no idea what before you start. That's the thing I love about it. Maybe you're going to learn about a new product that they bring, or some guy's knives he brought. You know, like there can be anything that's going to come. The coolest part is for the cooks, you know, to bring. Kyle Connaughton just came from California. He's going to open up a place called Single Thread, and you know, he's a pretty known chef. So to expose, just for the cooks that you work with, you know, trying to mentor, to have them just plop someone else in the kitchen and see how they work, and then further going to other restaurants around the world to either cook with friends or people you've never met before is really great. To, as you say, you send the recipes ahead and then they're like, well, we don't have, it's like, we're in Australia, we don't have that right now, so to then figure it out once you get there, and that's the coolest part too. You know, we're all focused on, restaurants are places for experiences for people, so you just try to maximize that with and figure it out together. That's the coolest part about cooking, because if you're going to another restaurant, that's all they're concerned with too. It's how happy the guests will be by the end. So.
In terms of what I just said, yeah, one thing is when I go out and use someone else's brewery to make a beer. Another thing is a collaboration thing. Obviously, I don't just make my own recipe. When I make collaborations, I collaborate on the recipe. You know, I know there's a lot of beer collaborations out there. I actually think there's too much these days. Everybody collaborates with everybody. I think it's important when you do that. You have to bring in both breweries' ideas into the beer, because sometimes you see a collaboration and it doesn't fit either of the brewery, and I'm like, what the hell is the idea of all that? That would be like Daniel and you know, some René Redzepi making a French restaurant. That, you know, it would just be too weird, you know. Yeah. So when we do collaborations, we definitely bring in, you know, each other's ideas. And I like to use this, I like to use that. I'm doing a pretty cool collaboration. I did the first one. We're doing the second one next week with a brewery called Trillium in Boston, which is like the talk of the town right now. And I love those guys, become good friends of mine. Where, you know, we wanted to do two different beers, an IPA that they're famous for and a stout that I'm kind of famous for. So they gave me, and I gave them an IPA recipe, and they made a Trillium version of it, and they gave me a stout recipe, and I made an Evil Twin version of it. And that's kind of a cool way to collaborate, when we take something from each other and like rethink it. And we actually, I know if you've been to our restaurant, but if you haven't, what is it, June 23rd?
June 26th.
June 26th is a good day, because we're bringing Trillium into Tørst. We're doing a big tap takeover, but we're also doing a special dinner at Luksus, where, you know, we only do Trillium pairings with the food. And I don't know, have you heard about Trillium?
I think so.
I mean, it's like probably the most talked about brewery in the country right now. It's insanely good. So I'm excited about that. That's going to be a fun day. So come to Tørst and drink some. I mean, we're
going to sell out just by word of mouth.
Yeah, they are kind of rethinking the IPA, which is crazy, because the IPA is like 400 years old and people have rethought it many times. But them and Treehouse, also in Massachusetts, have like created this new style of IPAs that is totally different and just delicious. So it's pretty cool.
One more question.
I'm very honored that you named some of the beers after my name. Jesus.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, you know, you can pay me later.
Evil.
Also, baby Jesus. So, what made you make that choice, and what do you think about the fact that some states have banned the sales of your beer?
That's only cool. I'm not a religious guy, let me state that first. Not at all. I'm from Denmark. We are probably the most atheist country in the world, I think. It's a long story. It was kind of a coincidence. It was actually kind of a lost in translation thing. We were talking about something, and at one point I said, even more Jesus. It was like, I said Jesus because something was crazy, you say Jesus. And then something was even more crazy, and I said even more Jesus. And this guy I had this conversation with was like, this is the perfect name for a beer. I like the name too, it's very catchy, and you know, it might be
stirs the pot.
Yeah, that publicity is good to be banned.
Yeah.
Like, good, does good.
So now we have a bunch of Jesuses. Yeah, you have a lot of beers out there. Do you really? That's awesome.
Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to us, and we hope to see you in Greenpoint at Tørst and Luksus at some point.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.